Picture this scene and tell me it doesn't give you chills. It's August 24th, 410 AD. The gates of Rome, the eternal city, the heart of an empire that has dominated the known world for over 800 years, stand wide open. But not in welcome. Alaric's Visigoth warriors pour through the streets like a flood of vengeance. Marble temples that once housed gods are being stripped of their gold. Senators' wives scream as barbarians drag them from their villas. The Forum, where Caesar once walked, echoes with the clash of swords and the crackle of flames. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind. What if I told you this wasn't just the fall of an empire, it was the birth of the modern world? What if the greatest catastrophe in ancient history was actually the greatest transformation? What if Rome didn't really die that day? It just changed into something even more powerful. Here's the shocking truth they don't teach you in history class. The fall of Rome wasn't an ending, it was a metamorphosis. And the creature that emerged from Rome's ashes went on to rule Europe for the next 1,000 years, shape every government system you know today, and create the foundation of Western civilization as we know it. But wait, there's something even more incredible. What if I told you that every time you drive on a highway, attend a university, or walk into a courthouse, you're experiencing the direct legacy of Rome's so-called collapse? What if the empire never actually fell? It just put on new clothes and kept running the world. You're watching Truth Through Time, where we expose the hidden connections that textbooks miss and uncover the shocking truths that change everything you thought you knew about history. I need you to smash that subscribe button right now, asterisk, because what you're about to discover will completely transform how you see not just ancient Rome, but the entire foundation of modern society. Hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because the empire we're about to explore reached every corner of the known world, and I want to see how far this truth spreads today. Now buckle up, because we're about to uncover the most incredible institutional transformation in human history, how Rome's death became the world's rebirth. Part 1. The empire that ruled everything. Let me paint you a picture of power that will make modern superpowers look like amateur hour. At its peak in the 2nd century AD under Emperor Trajan, Rome wasn't just big, it was incomprehensibly massive. We're talking about an empire that stretched 2,500 miles east to west and 1,900 miles north to south. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. This wasn't just conquered territory sitting there doing nothing. This was a functioning, integrated superstate that makes the modern European Union look like a neighborhood watch committee. Picture this infrastructure. 50,000 miles of engineered roads so perfectly constructed that some are still in use today. Aqueduct systems delivering 200 million gallons of fresh water daily to cities across 3 continents. Professional armies totaling 450,000 soldiers, not conscripts or mercenaries, but career military personnel with standardized equipment, training, and retirement benefits. But here's where it gets absolutely incredible. Rome didn't just conquer territories, it transformed them. Under the Pax Romana, a farmer in Britain could sell grain to a merchant in Egypt using Roman currency, protected by Roman law, traveling on Roman roads, all under a single governmental system. This was globalization 2,000 years before anyone invented the term. Edward Gibbon, the legendary historian who spent 20 years studying Rome's decline, made this stunning observation in his masterwork The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Rome achieved the natural and inevitable effect of immoderate greatness. Think about that phrase, immoderate greatness. This empire was so successful it broke the normal rules of what empires could achieve. But here's what modern archaeology reveals that will shock you. Recent excavations by Brian Ward Perkins, documented in The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization, show that even ordinary Romans lived better than European nobility would live 500 years later. Roman pottery found in Britain shows higher quality and more sophisticated decoration than anything produced in medieval England. Roman concrete was so advanced that we only rediscovered the formula in the 20th century. Yet beneath this incredible success, something sinister was growing. Ward Perkins's archaeological evidence reveals economic decline visible decades before the political collapse. Trade routes were disrupted. Pottery quality declined. Building standards dropped. The seeds of destruction were planted at the very moment of Rome's greatest triumph. But here's the question that will haunt you. How does the most successful civilization in human history suddenly become vulnerable to barbarian tribes that couldn't even write their own names? The answer reveals a pattern of internal decay that modern superpowers ignore at their own peril. Part 2. The Barbarian Storm That Changed Everything. What I'm about to tell you sounds like a disaster movie, but every detail is documented historical fact. The year 376 AD. Along the Danube River, Roman sentries witness something that makes their blood run cold. Thousands of Gothic families, men, women, children, entire tribes, are fleeing across the river in makeshift boats, carrying everything they own, terror written on their faces. They're not invading Rome. They're running from something worse. Behind them comes Attila's Hun confederation, warriors so fierce that the Goths, who had been terrorizing Roman borders for generations, would rather throw themselves on Roman mercy than face Hun cavalry. As historian Peter Heather documents in The Fall of the Roman Empire, this wasn't just migration. It was a demographic tsunami that would reshape the entire European continent. But here's what's absolutely chilling. Rome's response revealed just how weak the empire had become. Instead of turning the Goths away or defeating them militarily, Roman officials made a deal. They would allow Gothic settlement within Roman territory in exchange for military service. Rome was so desperate for soldiers that it invited its enemies to move in and take over. The result was catastrophic beyond imagination. In 378 AD at the Battle of Adrianople, Gothic forces didn't just defeat a Roman army, they annihilated it and killed Emperor Valens himself. According to the contemporary historian Ammianus Marcellinus, this was the worst defeat suffered by the Romans since Cannabis. The myth of Roman invincibility died on that battlefield. But the psychological blow of 410 AD was even more devastating. When Alaric's Visigoths sacked Rome itself, the shock waves traveled across the entire known world. Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, captured the global impact. The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. The eternal city, the center of civilization, had fallen to barbarians. Here's what contemporary sources like Procopius and Orosius reveal. This wasn't just military defeat, it was civilizational trauma. Romans across the empire began questioning everything they believed about their society, their gods, their future. If Rome could fall, what was permanent? What was safe? What could anyone believe in anymore? But here's the twist that changes everything. While Romans were paralyzed by shock and disbelief, one institution was already positioning itself to inherit the empire. An institution that had been preparing for this moment for over a century. Part 3. The internal rot that killed an empire. What killed Rome wasn't barbarian swords, it was a cancer eating the empire from within. And the symptoms are terrifyingly familiar to anyone watching modern politics. By the 4th century, Roman government had become a revolving door of incompetent emperors, military coups, and political chaos. Between 235 to 284 AD, just 50 years, Rome had 26 different emperors. 20 of them were murdered by their own soldiers or political rivals. Christopher Kelly's The End of Empire documents how this constant instability made long-term planning impossible and turned government service into a death sentence. But the economic collapse was even more devastating. Rome's currency became so worthless that Emperor Diocletian's edict on maximum prices in 301 AD tried to control inflation by law, fixing the price of everything from bread to haircuts to prostitutes. It failed spectacularly, creating black markets and destroying what remained of Roman commerce. Here's the archaeological proof that will shock you. Pottery imports to Roman Britain dropped by 90% between 400 to 500 AD. Not 9%, 90%. This represents the complete collapse of the trade networks that had held the empire together for centuries. Ward Perkins's excavations show Roman cities shrinking, public buildings falling into ruin, and the complex economy that supported Roman civilization simply disappearing. But perhaps most damaging was the cultural transformation. Roman elites, the people who should have been defending Roman civilization, were abandoning Roman cities for fortified country villas. Emperor Honorius, 395 to 423 AD, rarely even visited Rome, ruling instead from the heavily fortified city of Ravenna. The people who ran the empire had lost faith in their own system. The military situation was equally catastrophic. Rome's legendary legions were increasingly made up of Germanic mercenaries who had no loyalty to Roman culture or Roman values. These foederati fought for pay, not patriotism. When the pay stopped coming, they simply took what they wanted by force. Here's the most chilling parallel to modern times. Roman taxation became so crushing that farmers abandoned their land rather than pay the taxes. Archaeological surveys show entire agricultural regions depopulated as people fled the tax collectors. The government was literally destroying the economy it depended on to survive. But as Roman political authority crumbled, another power was building the infrastructure to replace it. A power that had learned valuable lessons from Rome's mistakes and was ready to inherit an empire. Part 4: Rise of the New Empire, Christianity's Master Plan. While Roman emperors were murdering each other in palace coups, Christian bishops were quietly building the most sophisticated administrative network in human history. Here's what will blow your mind: by 400 AD, the Christian Church had created a parallel government that functioned more effectively than the actual Roman government. When imperial officials fled their posts, Christian bishops stepped in to provide food distribution, legal arbitration, and public order. The proof is in the documented actions. When Alaric besieged Rome in 408 AD, it wasn't the emperor who negotiated with him, it was Pope Innocent I. When Attila the Hun threatened to sack Rome in 452 AD, Emperor Valentinian III sent Pope Leo I to meet with the barbarian king. Think about what this means. The religious leader of the Christians had become more important than the political leader of the Romans. Peter Brown's groundbreaking research in the rise of Western Christendom reveals the masterful strategy behind this transformation. Christian bishops weren't just providing spiritual guidance, they were systematically replacing Roman administrative functions. They collected taxes, called tithes, maintained legal courts, ecclesiastical tribunals, organized public works, church construction, and even commanded military forces. Crusades would come later, but the infrastructure was already being built. But here's the most brilliant part of the Christian takeover: they adopted Roman organizational structures wholesale. The word diocese comes directly from Roman administrative terminology. The Church's hierarchical structure, pope, cardinal, archbishop, bishop, priest, mirrors Roman political hierarchy exactly: emperor, senator, governor, magistrate, official. Henri Perren's classic study Muhammad and Charlemagne documents how thoroughly the Church absorbed Roman institutional knowledge. When Roman law courts closed, church courts took over using the same legal procedures. When Roman schools shut down, Christian monasteries became the new centers of learning. When Roman roads fell into disrepair, pilgrimage routes maintained the transportation networks. By 500 AD, something unprecedented had happened. A religious organization had successfully inherited a political empire without conquering it militarily. The Church had become what historian Charles Freeman calls the ghost of Rome in Christian clothing. But here's what's most shocking about this transformation: the Christian Church didn't just preserve Roman civilization, it expanded it. Under Church leadership, Roman culture spread farther north and east than it ever had under Roman legions. Ireland, Scotland, Germany, Poland, Hungary, regions that Roman armies never successfully conquered, became thoroughly Romanized through Christian missionaries. The result? An empire larger, more durable, and more influential than anything Rome had ever achieved. Part 5: The Undying Legacy: How Rome Rules Us Today. Here's something that will make you see your daily life completely differently. You wake up every morning in a world that Rome created. Let's start with the most obvious evidence. Roman law forms the foundation of every legal system in the Western world. The Code of Justinian, compiled between 529 to 534 AD, provided the legal framework that modern courts still use. When you sign a contract, appear before a judge, or claim constitutional rights, you're participating in Roman legal traditions that are over 1,500 years old. But the influence goes much deeper than law. The word civilization comes from the Latin civitas, meaning the values and institutions that make urban life possible. Every time you use that word, You're acknowledging Rome's definition of what makes a society advanced. Here's archaeological evidence that will shock you. Adalbert de Voges' research on medieval monasteries reveals that institutions like Monte Cassino, founded by Saint Benedict in 529 AD, preserved not just Christian texts but Roman engineering manuals, agricultural techniques, and administrative procedures. These monks weren't just praying, they were functioning as libraries for the entire infrastructure of Roman civilization. The linguistic evidence is overwhelming. Latin didn't die with the Roman Empire. It evolved into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Every time someone speaks a Romance language, they're speaking evolved Roman. But even Germanic languages like English absorbed thousands of Latin words. Government, justice, citizen, republic, senate, law, culture, these fundamental concepts of modern society are Roman words describing Roman ideas. But here's what's most remarkable. Roman governmental concepts survived the fall of Rome and became the foundation of modern democracy. The word republic is Roman. Senate is Roman. The concept of separation of powers that defines American government comes from Roman political theory. The Founding Fathers explicitly modeled the United States government on Roman precedents, down to using Roman architectural styles for government buildings. Rafe de Crespigny's comparative study Fire over Luoyang shows how unique Rome's survival was. When the Han Dynasty fell in China in 220 AD, Chinese civilization fragmented into competing kingdoms for centuries. When Rome fell, Roman civilization didn't fragment. It transformed and expanded through Christian institutions. Here's the ultimate proof of Rome's undying influence. Judith Herron's research in Byzantium, The Surprising Life of a Medieval Empire documents how the Eastern Roman Empire continued for another 1,000 years after 476 AD. The Roman Empire didn't fall in 476, only the western half fell. The eastern half, based in Constantinople, survived until 1453 AD. And even that wasn't the end. When Mehmet II conquered Constantinople, he proclaimed himself Caesar of Rome, continuing the imperial tradition. When Ivan III of Russia married the niece of the last Byzantine emperor, he claimed the title Tsar, which means Caesar. The Roman Empire kept reinventing itself for 2,000 years. Part 6. Destroying the Myths. Everything you think you know about Rome's fall is probably wrong. Let me shatter the biggest myths that have distorted this story for centuries. Myth number 1. Rome fell suddenly in 476 AD. The truth, as Edward Gibbon himself admitted in later editions of his work, the Roman Empire did not perish, but was transformed. The date 476 AD marks when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed, but Roman institutions, Roman law, Roman culture, and Roman administrative systems continued functioning under Christian management. Myth 2. Barbarian invasions destroyed Roman civilization. The truth, most Germanic tribes wanted to join Roman civilization, not destroy it. Alaric himself had been a Roman general before he became a Gothic king. The Visigoths in Spain, the Ostrogoths in Italy, and the Vandals in North Africa all tried to maintain Roman administrative systems. They were conquering Rome to become Roman, not to eliminate Romanness. Myth number 3. The Dark Ages began immediately after Rome's fall. The truth, this is perhaps the most damaging myth of all. Recent archaeological research shows that many aspects of Roman civilization, literacy, trade, urban life, technological knowledge, survived and even flourished in certain regions under church management. The Dark Ages were dark only in comparison to Rome's peak, and only in certain geographic areas. Myth 4. Christianity was foreign to Roman culture. The truth, by 400 AD, Christianity had been Roman for over a century. Christian theologians like Augustine were trained in Roman rhetoric, Roman law, and Roman philosophy. Christian institutional structures were Roman structures with Christian personnel. Christianity didn't replace Roman civilization. It became the carrier of Roman civilization. Here's the historical evidence that proves this. When Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in 800 AD, nobody thought this was strange or innovative. It was seen as the restoration of Roman imperial authority under Christian leadership. The Roman Empire hadn't ended, It had just changed management. Here's the truth that changes everything about how you see history, politics, and the modern world. The fall of Rome wasn't an ending. It was the greatest institutional transformation in human history. What died in 476 AD wasn't Roman civilization, but Roman paganism. What survived was everything else. Roman law, Roman administration, Roman engineering, Roman urban planning, Roman literary culture, and Roman imperial ambition. The Christian Church didn't conquer the Roman Empire, it became the Roman Empire. And through that transformation, Roman influence spread farther and lasted longer than it ever could have under pagan emperors. Every time you participate in Western civilization, you're living in Rome's shadow. But here's what's most incredible. This pattern of institutional transformation rather than destruction has shaped every major historical transition since. When the British Empire fell, British legal systems, the English language, and British parliamentary democracy spread across the globe. When the Soviet Union collapsed, its former republics adopted many Soviet administrative structures. Empires don't die, they evolve. Understanding Rome's transformation is the key to understanding how power really works in the modern world. Political systems that seem completely different often share the same deep structural DNA. The Roman Empire never fell. It just kept changing its name and appearance while maintaining its essential character. This is Truth Through Time, and if this episode has completely transformed how you see the connection between ancient and modern civilization, and I know it has, then you need to take action right now. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because we're just getting started on exposing the hidden connections that explain how the ancient world created the modern world. Share this video with everyone who thinks they understand history, your teachers, your friends, your family. Post it on social media with hashtag Rome Never Fell, and let's start a conversation about the real forces that shape civilizations. Comment below and tell me, what aspect of Roman influence do you see most clearly in your daily life? I read every comment and your insights help shape future episodes. Subscribe now, share this everywhere, and keep watching. Because the more you understand about Rome's transformation, the more you'll understand about how power, culture, and civilization really work. Subscribe and tap the bell icon to walk with us through powerful stories of faith and history. Thumbs up like if this episode touched you. Speech balloon comment to share your thoughts or reflections in comment section.